I guess the first question is, does anybody have any topic that they would like to kick off? It can be a question. It can be a rant, as long as it's a polite rant. It can be pretty much anything that you would like. And if it gets too out of bounds, I will certainly bring us back to center. So with that, would anybody like to jump in? Christian and Stu, you're on camera, so maybe we'll start with you. Is there a topic that you would like to throw out to the CPOS community?
I got to give that one some thought. Okay, first off, can you hear me?
We hear you sound great, Stu.
Okay. Let's see here. The one that I keep coming back to, and this is something that, obviously you're going to be familiar with in your work, Charlie, is the whole concept of open source in education. And I'm always curious to see what are other people doing in the education world to incorporate open source either into infrastructure or instruction.
Sure. Okay. Absolutely. I have a ton to say about that, but I'd like to open that up really to anyone else who is here to maybe share. I know Don, he jumped on if he would be willing maybe to talk a little bit about his open hardware projects. Okay. I think we'd really love to hear from him.
As far as answering his question?
Yeah. So what are you doing with open source in education, Don?
I don't do a lot intentionally. So 3D printing, the Marlin firmware, that's an element of what I do. I do try to steer my students to 3D modeling in open source worlds, just because a lot of them aren't going to pay for a professional license that's pretty high fees. I don't do a lot intentionally on the software side. Nowhere close to what Penn Manor is doing. And I don't know what happened there. I got an echo.
Jeff.
Yep, you can mute there a second, Jeff. Thank you.
So I don't feel like I have a great answer to that.
Okay.
I do have a question when we move into the next subject, but.
Okay, great. All right. So Don, I'll cue you up for the next question. And Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with open source in education?
So I've been a free software evangelist in education since 1993. And it's been an exciting ride. We're doing a lot now. So I'm working in Arlington Public Schools, and we have a full associate degree concurrent with in computer science, concurrent with high school program that is finally in place.
Cool.
It's a small program, so I am the only instructor now, but I'm expecting that that's going to change. So this year has been the craziest year ever. I'm teaching all 4 years, like the ninth graders, 10th, 11th, and 12th. We use all free software in the entire program. So I'm a huge fan of the Raspberry Pi OS. And I found that it installs on just about any old hardware you can imagine, and especially now, I have a bunch of old laptops. It installs on all of them, so I've kind of settled in on that. There's a lot of great curriculum around that.
Jeffrey, have you tried 400?
Oh, you mean the Raspberry Pi 400? No, I have not. No, but I'm actually talking about, so there's a version of Raspberry Pi OS that will install on Intel laptops, or it basically it's Debian 10 with this desktop layered on top of it, and I guess because of System D now, it actually just does the regular Debian install and then auto detects all the Wi-Fi drivers. Everything works across the board. It has been the most delightful thing. I work with Kevin Cole in a worker co-op, Nova Web Development, and we have a lot of our students actually become interns. We had one become a member this year, and so that's been going on too. And we're partnering with some efforts in Liberia to start some schools, and we're hoping to transplant our program over there. So I'll stop.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Okay, excellent. Jeff, thank you so much. Stu, do you want to talk a little bit about, maybe briefly, about what you're doing with open source in education?
Oh, sure. I'm a social studies teacher at a school called Aspen Academy in Savage, Minnesota. And the big push that I made for using open source at school was through the clubs that I've led both at this school and the previous one. I work in the middle school, and it to me always seemed like a natural fit to try to get middle school students interested in doing things with tech. So I started Linux clubs. At my previous school, it was a Hmong charter school, and so that club was called the Asian Penguins. In my current school, the club is called the Penguin Corps. And we started off in the fall of last year in the after school program, just getting a group of kids together to try things out, to learn how to use some of the programs. What are some of the philosophy behind open source, at least at a basic 5th through 8th grade level, and then get them into installing the operating system and the apps and troubleshooting hardware and poking around inside computers. And then as a sideline for the program was recycling computers for students that didn't have them at home. And we really thought it was just going to be a sideline. And it's a school out in a rather wealthy suburb. So at first glance, it didn't look like there were that many kids that needed computers. And then COVID-19 hit, and we were shut down due to distance learning. And the school turned to me and the club for a solution, because we needed to get more computers out into kids' homes, and the school really didn't have a supply of machines or the funds to get them. So I started taking in donations of whatever I could get, mostly laptops. The kids were helping me out initially until the school was shut down, and then I kind of had to take that on my own, and we started pushing those out to kids' homes. And the model we had for education in the spring was asynchronous. So teachers were recording lessons, putting things in Google Classroom for kids to work on. But since it wasn't a lot of live classes, kids could share devices in their homes. So it's like we figured if we could at least get it down to like a 2-to-1 ratio in some of these homes, we'd be doing pretty good. From October to March, we gave away 6 computers. We were thinking, okay, I guess we're doing all right. And then in April, from like middle of March up to the first week of May, we gave away 60 computers. So it, demand shot way up once all of a sudden parents realized, oh wait, it's like we're teaching kids in our homes now, so we need more computers. Then we come back in the fall, and we're hybrid and synchronous, which means all classes are live. And since it's hybrid, every kid is going to spend at least part of their time learning at home. And every kid needs a machine because they're all going to be on at the same time. And we gave, at our open house, we gave away like 132 computers in that one day, and it still wasn't enough. By the first week of October, we got to a point where we had finally sort of caught up, and every kid who needed a machine, or parents had expressed a need for a machine, had one. And at that point, we had handed out somewhere in the range of like 270 just in 2 months. Almost all of the computers were donated either from businesses or individuals. We did have to buy some, but we bought those used through the state surplus services. So machines that were retired from government agencies. It's kind of like the state of Minnesota's garage sale. So we could go in there and pick up computers cheap. I think we bought about 50. But altogether during that period of time, we gave away like 270. I went and tried to crunch the numbers to find out how much did we actually spend to try to get all of this stuff done. If we had to buy new machines, it would have cost us over $90,000, but we did it for less than $5.
Yeah, that's excellent work, Stu. And Stu's been doing just continuous excellent work with his students for the past several years. Stu, if you have a link to what you've been doing, please, if you could drop into the chat so everyone can have access to that as well. I certainly encourage you to check it out. Does anybody else have any other questions related to open education? Again, we're going to keep it moving, and then we'll jump to another topic in a few minutes. Go ahead, Christian.
With Microsoft adopting a lot of open source and really starting to get developers on board, I was at the first session with Visual Studio Code. I'm just curious, as like a pulse survey, how do people feel about that? Are they sensing that Microsoft is applying good in the community of open source, or is there still a negative stigma around Microsoft?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. So I'd be curious to hear what people think about that, both in the chat. Jeff, Don, or Stu, would you like to chime in on that briefly? Jeff had his hand up first. So Jeff, go ahead if you have an opinion of the perception of Microsoft.
I'm just going to make a very narrow comment that I'm grateful now for the first time ever. This has become real easy because of the Linux subsystem for Windows. I now can work with students in any platform, whether they've got a Mac or they've got Windows or they've got Linux, and we can use a bash shell and we can do good. So that I'm really glad. I'm quite grateful to Microsoft for making that available in terms of reducing the barrier. I'll just say that.
We're going home.
Joseph, yeah, I agree. I tend to agree with that in terms of helping to improve Microsoft's reputation in general. But I also, Josh, I see your comment coming in. You know, it's hard to not forget the history of Microsoft and open source. For me personally, I tend to be a forward-looking individual. You know, I think that actions speak, and if they continue to head in this direction, I think maybe it has been a bit of a change of heart. Anybody else on the panel who is live with audio or video want to weigh in on that question?
I'm kind of encouraged by what Microsoft is doing, to be perfectly honest. I guess we joke about this with my students. I put that quote from Linus Torvalds up in my room where it said, "If Microsoft ever writes programs for Linux, I'll know I've won." And I show the kids my laptop, and it's like, okay, right now, this is a Linux laptop. It is running Ubuntu. I have 3 programs, all published by Microsoft, on this machine right now. So things have changed, and I think that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, Bob, I hear what you're saying too. You know, trust is indeed it's very hard to earn, especially once it's been broken. So I totally get what you're saying there. There was a comment too related just with education, really quick before we kind of lose this topic. About the help with students. Was there help with students to help you with open source? And I'm guessing, Grant, if I'm reading into your question over the whole COVID pandemic, has that gone down? I can just briefly address that. I feel that Penn Manor, for all the work that we've been doing with open source and with our students, the community is still incredibly supportive of us. So I owe a lot to the open source community, both locally here in Lancaster, but also, nationally as well. I'll give a quick shout out to Red Hat in particular that has helped to feature our work. I know they've engaged with Stu before. They are just tremendous. They're tremendous advocates for the work that we are all collectively doing with open source in education. So, okay, moving on to the next topic. Don claimed it. Don, there was a question for you before you ask your question. A little bit back in the thread, I think it was a question about software that you're using. Where did that go?
I'm not sure I noticed that. I did have time to think. We just had an instructor retire from my program. So I teach at Thaddeus Stevens College in electromechanical technology. So my students work on robotics and automation. And the replacement hire, his name's Dan Rogers. And his background is military. Before that, a machinist at Lancaster CTC. He's a welder, but then he earned a bachelor's and a master's in computer science. And he worked at Arconic, or what used to be Alcoa, and J&J before he came to us as an educator. But he's bringing a new emphasis on the coding side, not just PLCs or relay logic, the hardware style PLCs that most manufacturing uses. So I put a video link, a YouTube link, and it's about 30 minutes of projects he did with our sophomores. And a couple of them are Raspberry Pi or Arduino based, and more than a couple of them are using proprietary hardware, but then they're using ROS. And I think we had one of our students doing some Python, maybe some JavaScript. Because it's not my hard, specialty, I'm proud of what they did, but I can't claim. I even texted Dan. I was hoping to get him to come in here and he could talk to you guys all at your level. But ROS is definitely a theme that we're starting to see, and it's robotic operating systems. So that's pretty exciting for the first time for our program at Stevens. We've been around for about 5 or 6 years. So we're at that point where we can start maturing and modifying our curriculum to track with relevant trends in industry. And to see something like ROS make inroads in automation and manufacturing is pretty exciting. Did you find the link or the question, Charlie?
We did, yeah. It was, do you have an open source software 3D modeling suggestion?
It depends what you want to do. And if you want to go to 3D printing, like Blender is really powerful. Anybody that's doing any CGI or video game content creation, all those things, there's a lot. Blender, I think, is probably one of the most common. But if you're going to 3D printing at the end, if that's part of your end goal, I don't know. There's OpenCAD, OpenSCAD, GrabCAD. I think OpenCAD is probably the only heavily used in the community. I tend to use Fusion 360, which is owned by Autodesk, and the 3D printing community is all up in arms because they just started moving towards monetization of that, which I kind of knew the last 3 years it was headed that way. FreeCAD, yeah. And it's interesting, people that are programmers love the program-driven SCAD type programs, and I'm not, so that's just, again, not something I use very often. So Tinkercad, technically I don't think is open source, but it gets used heavily in education and it's free. There are things I like about it and then things I don't like about it, but
yeah, Tinkercad is one. We've been using that extensively with students across multiple grade levels.
There's a community of really cool projects that are based on Tinkercad, and they're open-ended. To me, they're relevant if people go in that career field, and get into a STEM career field. So, I think Tinkercad's a very powerful one. That'd be something to ask Phil Shapiro. I'm guessing he'll talk about it this afternoon. And he's probably got more K through 12 awareness than I have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's, what we found, to that question, I can maybe expand upon that briefly. I mentioned that we use Tinkercad, especially in grades K through 8 in particular. The problem that we often face in K-12 education is that we have, constrained time periods for classes. So our teachers need tools that allow them to hit the ground running as quickly as possible. Many of these platforms, they're absolutely phenomenal for high school and beyond, but it's very, very difficult to bring our students up to speed quickly with something, beyond Tinkercad, right? Because our teachers just want to get them, they don't have a lot of time. They want to get them modeling, they want to get them creating. And they need to do that as quickly as possible because of the crazy time constraints and time tables.
So one of the things you run into is what I call 3D spatial awareness, and that's part of why it's hard to bring in something to a student group that hasn't. They may have played video games like 90% of their life, but if they've never done Minecraft, if they've never thought, about what does this pen look like in 3 orientations, and then how do I, And that's what's kind of important, whether you're doing CGI, simulation, AR, VR, that 3D or spatial awareness is a big deal. And I've done so many conferences, especially over the summer, and one of my favorites is Construct 3D. And to me, that's one of the themes and elements, and I keep gravitating to people that are doing that, especially in a K through 12 environment, because their student body is going to have such a huge advantage. And it doesn't really matter what software gets used or for what purpose. If that student is thinking in 3 dimensions, they're getting, in my opinion, a lifelong skill. We're just going to become more and more spatial awareness driven in our career fields, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really terrific point. Something that, is as educators we wrestle with too, right? It's not necessarily about the tool that we choose;
Yes.
It's about the concepts, right, and the skills. So again, coming back to something simple like a Tinkercad that gets kids thinking in 3 dimensions, right? It starts to build up a base knowledge, a base awareness of how these tools work, and then as they get older, we can introduce them something to more sophisticated, like a FreeCAD and other tools. But again, it's introducing those concepts early enough to try to kind of shape their thinking. So,
and if
that's a
you're
really good point.
at the command prompt and you understand root directory structure, super admin, like there's a whole world you're aware of, even if you're in an OS like iOS or Microsoft or, and that's a huge problem. I see a lot of 18-year-olds and they're consumers of a lot of things, and they, for what we need them to do in automation, they need to be their own IT person, and they might have to open up some port and get around a firewall, or they have to have all these little pieces of knowledge. And a lot of my students don't even understand directory tree structure because they never had to use DOS and they didn't go through Windows 3.1. And so the further we progress,
and an iPad certainly isn't really going to be exposing file
hides
structure, right?
yeah.
So that's good, Don. So, okay, I definitely I could go on a while about education open source in this discussion, but we don't want to just let that dominate the discussion. So certainly, if other folks have questions for the group, again, we want to hear them. You can request sharing for audio or video, and I'll open that up for you. We have multiple slots now for those.
That's all right.
Oh yeah, we never. I'm sorry.
We never got. There's some comments in there. I'll maybe try and address about some of the CAD, but
please.
Wondering if anybody in here is familiar with Helium, and it's just helium.com, and it's blockchain interacting with a network. It says people-powered networks start a wireless revolution. I'm just curious if anybody out there has any experience with it.
This is the first I've heard about it.
While we're seeing if anybody recognizes it, the reason I'm interested in it, I've been a casual observer of beekeeping for about 5 to 10 years. So that's something I plan to do this winter and get ready in the spring to keep bees. And one of the things that's freaked me out is caring for the hive. And so I get all the hacker sites mixed up. There's a Long Hive project, and it's 3 college students in Philadelphia. I think like 1 UPenn and 2 Drexel or something like that. But they published this hack for good. They won financing, and it's Long Hive, and it's monitoring the weight of the hive. It's using acoustics, and then this open Wi-Fi, and it's really inexpensive data pipe up to the cloud, and then they're doing a lot of stuff I don't understand, machine learning, and but I vaguely understand. So I'm really excited about it. So they're acoustically monitoring the sound the bees are making in the cloud, and then pushing back to you a dashboard of whether your hives are in good shape or not. And so as a newbie, that it gets me into beekeeping, and it gets me into some really cool big data, machine learning, it's just really cool stuff. And it's using sensors. So you have the whole, physical computing element to it. But it's based on the Helium network. And that's the first time I heard of it. So this is the community I thought if anybody locally is doing anything with Helium, this is where you're going to be. But nobody's spatting yet.
Okay. Yeah, this is pretty cool.
I am interested in this
in,
one laptop for child.
Okay, and Tom just jumped in as well, so I don't know if he had a comment about helium.
So I came across this. I'm actually going to be giving a talk a little bit later about radio stuff.
I saw that.
Helium specifically is kind of a touchy subject in the radio community because they are specifically using public radio waves for private monetization Bitcoin trading.
Interesting.
The underlying infrastructure, however, for all of that communication is based off of what's called LoRaWAN, and I'm actually going to spell that out here.
Yeah, I've seen that in their documentation.
Yeah, so that is a low-power, wide-area network communications protocol, and it's free for anybody to use. So that actually is kind of the underlying infrastructure that Helium is using for their kind of monetization, but anybody who is interested can get a LoRaWAN device and send whatever kind of data they want over it.
Okay. So do you think it will be stunted in its growth because of that resistance as part of its use?
Potentially, but I don't know if it would really kind of make any sort of difference since the actual underlying infrastructure is free for anybody to use.
Well, I think the problem with a lot of the LoRaWAN stuff isn't about whether it's free or how available it is. It's getting the actual end users to adopt it. And the idea of having some sort of cryptocurrency on this LoRaWAN network, the Helium one, is theoretically an incentive to get more people on it. Because in order for any sort of mesh network to actually be functional, you need a lot of nodes. If there aren't a lot of nodes, it's not very fast. It's not very reliable. It doesn't matter. I've contemplated some of my buddies like building little LoRaWAN communicators just to try it out. But if you don't have multiple nodes in between, you're then stuck trying to convince, oh, hey, Mr. Neighbor, I've talked to you maybe a couple times. Would you be willing to keep this thing plugged in, like in your basement, or something, so that I can use your home now as a relay to communicate with my buddy? And trying to sell that to the masses is what you have to do. It looks like Helium is sort of trying to do that, but I'm not exactly sure what their goal with the blockchain stuff is. In my opinion, it just looks like they're throwing blockchain in there to try and lure in investors as a buzzword. Like, hey guys, Bitcoin, blockchain, you know that thing that's hitting almost $20,000 in value? We have something like that. Come to us. Even though it might not meet any needs or actually do anything for them. But I like the idea of the LoRa stuff. There just needs to be a good project that gives more normal average users an incentive to actually start using it, because it is a very cool platform and idea.
Okay, thanks.
Joseph, did you want to jump in
I was just
on
going to
this
comment.
topic?
That kind of reminds me of the Xfinity hotspots that they have, where if you have a Comcast account, you can use any XFi I guess that's more hotspots than relays. A little bit different, I guess, but that's the first thing I thought of. I typically turn that off because I personally don't like the idea of someone using my access point if I'm paying for it. But if it was an open source thing, I think I would be more open to that, I think. Just a note.
But it is a critical mass adoption. Otherwise, you have a mesh that's not even...
It's either not reliable, or the big thing is if not enough people start adopting it, there's nothing developed for it. And if there's nothing developed for it, it's like, it's great that you might be able to keep track of your beehive, but the mesh then obviously suffers because no one's using it. It's a chicken and the eggs problem.
All right, thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Don. Okay, looks like we've run out of steam on that topic, so I am taking suggestions for the next topic. So if anyone, and if you'd like, you can also kick it off by typing in the chat window. And, oh, there we go. Joseph is back, so we'll let him in again in the chat window, or if you'd like to turn on your AV tools, we can do that as well. So take it away, Joseph.
iNaturalist.org. I did a lightning talk about this previously. I just think it's really cool because people can upload observations of any wildlife, plants, fungus, animals, birds, etc. So it's kind of open data, but the website is also open source. I upload observations to it a lot. I haven't written any code for it, obviously. The API is available. I think there's potential for some games or tools to make using the API where, like, you make a quiz, like you look at all the birds that are in PA, you show a picture of the bird, and then you say, what kind of bird is this? And then because the iNaturalist knows what bird it is, and then you can kind of have a large data set to kind of just make stuff that might be kind of interesting. And obviously for biologists and stuff, it's a lot of data to use. And for things like the spotted lanternfly, that data is very useful and just something that is interesting to me, and it's open source related.
So I've seen. Thank you for bringing that up. So iNaturalist is the tool. I've seen this before. I think I may have played with it in the past. But if just to kind of take a step back for a second. So in essence, it's a citizen science data collection.
And I know you know Dr. Hardy, both Dr. Hardys, and I know they have their Wiki Plant Atlas website, which it's very similar to that.
Yeah, and for the group, so there are two Dr. Hardys, one that teaches in the biology department at Miller University and the other in the computer science department, who've certainly done some work with citizen science and citizen data collection.
I don't know that
they're associated with this project.
Before I knew about iNaturalist, I had known about Dr. Christopher Hardy's Wiki Plant Atlas, and it's very similar.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So iNaturalist, I think it's a web app and a mobile app as well.
I'm into bird watching and stuff, so like just wildlife in general. But it's a lot of fun to look and see. Oh, well, in this county, what are the most commonly reported animals, and then upload your own observations and stuff. And then the API and the open source aspect open up a lot of possibilities if you want to kind of tinker with it.
So maybe this is open source adjacent, but I've recently discovered
I'm not
BirdNet
familiar with that necessarily.
Are you? So it's kind of crazy, actually. So what it's doing, I'm sure it's using machine learning in the background, but if you can see that, so it's listening right now. Basically, you just take your smartphone and listen to the background birds. You take a sample, and it will essentially identify the birds.
Specifically, but iNaturalist actually has machine learning stuff. When you upload your photo, it will have suggestions for you. So if it's a clear, close proximity photo, it will tell you with pretty good confidence what it thinks the animal is, which is very useful. Usually when someone,
that's fantastic.
Because I'm a bird watcher, people send me pictures of birds, like, what is this bird? And if I don't know, I'll just take the picture, upload it to iNaturalist, and see what suggestions they give me, and then do a little bit of research, and I can tell them, typically.
Yeah. So a couple questions around iNaturalist, and I also don't know about the BirdNet app. I don't know if that's open source. iNaturalist,
and I think
is an
on the main webpage, on the sidebar, there are actually bugs there. Like, you can, if you wanted to, and you are familiar with the language it's written in, you could like open a pull request or something and probably help them improve their application.
That's super cool. Thanks for the shout out on that. Kevin and Grant, did you have comments also regarding iNaturalist? I hear some birds.
I'm not good with bird sound, but I will be able to identify that. I'm still relatively new to bird.
Why without a net? Can you identify the bird?
No, I didn't have anything useful to contribute other than bird calls.
Okay, very good. We have room for bird calls. Grant, did you have something to include? I think you're muted.
Yes,
Grant.
You're muted. You're still muted.
Hey Grant, Hey Grant, we can't hear you. I think you might be muted. There we go. We can hear us. All right. Still, let me see. It says I cannot unmute you, so you may be muted locally on your system. And it's cool. We're still figuring out which buttons to push on this platform. Still can't hear you, Grant. Maybe try to leave for a second, then come back in. I can readmit you as a moderator for AV.
Joel Walker asked a question, how they handle the set. I know that you just submit data. So basically, data is research grade if it has. So one thing you can do is you can add identifications to other people's observations. So some people, they just sit there and they find observations and they say, well, I know this is a cardinal, so I'm going to say this is a cardinal. And if you get more than 2/3 of a observation identified, then it's research grade. So I think that's how they determine the quality of the data.
Oh, okay. Welcome, Joel.
Joel, echo.
Okay. Welcome, Joel. Did you have a follow-up to that question?
Sorry. Hang on.
Okay. We can hear you, Joel. If you had a follow-up to that.
Got it. Yeah. I think I am echoing. Sorry. Is everyone getting feedback? Okay.
No, it sounds loud and clear now.
I was actually just curious. Like, there's so many different projects that we work on that could make like good use out of like that data as well. I just didn't know if there was what the access to that data was.
I'm not muted. The access is anyone can do whatever they want with the data. There are people who will. I think there's like amphibians of PA. Like they've added my observations to their data set, and they use that for whatever. I don't know what they're using the data for, but you can create collections of data sets and use it for whatever purpose you want. I'm not a biologist, so I don't know what purpose it serves. I just upload any animal I see that I take a picture of and share it. So I don't know what people do with the data, but the data is there, and I know researchers use it pretty extensively. There's invasive species groups, like that's one thing that they'll do to track invasive species and stuff like that.
Yeah, super
I can actually share my screen if you're interested to see a quick view of it. I think I can share it.
Yeah, fire away.
So these are just some recent observations I've made. So this is research grade. Now this one doesn't have it because only one person identified it. Obviously, it's a poor image, so I think it's a bufflehead, but it may not be because it's very zoomed out. You can upload evidence of creatures. So I was in up near Scranton a couple weekends ago, and I saw this, which was there's a beaver dam here and a beaver dam here. So it was evidence of a beaver. So you don't have to see the creature, but evidence alone is enough to get an identification for it. So you have 2/3.
What's it look like on that map? Like,
on the map, sure.
In the GIS, like.
So that'll just show where my specific observation is. But if you go to American beaver, and then you can look at its native to the United States, there's some statistics there, seasonality. You can upload data points with your observations. So here's the map here. You can see where they're located. And this is what's really fun. I will just look at this stuff for a long time just because I think it's really interesting. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And if you go here, you can see all my observations to see all the stuff that I uploaded. I have 1,717 observations, and I go to map view.
That's cool.
Sure. So here's my map view. Most of it is in PA, but
what would be cool is just give me an idea, Charlie or whatever, for like local area networks, like some sort of like mix, like tech people doing like nature things with like the county conservancy. Like,
oh yeah, definitely. I wouldn't be surprised if they use this to some extent.
Yeah.
eBird is another open source. I don't know if eBird's open source, but eBird is something that birders use more exclusively. That also has a plethora of data. If you look here, you can see before COVID, I would often go for walks at work, and these are all the observations I made on my walks. So redo search and map, and you can see the frequency of the species that I see.
Yeah, I love projects like this as an educator, obviously, right? Because it is a real world way to get kids excited about the natural world, right? And also make an immediate impact on that, right? Where they're taking observations, they're collecting data, they're contributing in a meaningful way. But I think too, as adults, I think it's really valuable, right? Because it gives adults a chance to reconnect, with nature. And that's probably a talk for, a different conference, right? But I would say if our open source community is encouraging the adults of the world to have a greater understanding of the natural world, I think that's a level of success, right? It's not just all about creating code for the next service product or next generation of Facebook.
It's something that's very.
We appreciate you sharing this, Joseph.
I'll unshare my screen, or I'll just leave.
Excellent. Good. We certainly have a few more minutes here. We're scheduled till 12:15. So, gang, if there is any other topic that you would like to discuss, Kevin, we still have you up. If there's anything you want to kick out for discussion, or gang, if you'd like to throw that out in the chat comments, we can take it from there. Kevin, since you are on screen, anything that you would like to throw
doing any
to
fun,
the group?
interesting stuff with music? I'm now helping a student a little bit with music blocks, which is Scratch for the musically inclined, but not really. But I'm also very interested in. I've got Ubuntu Studio and KX Studio installed, and I keep promising myself to do more with music and audio and open source, and I don't know. Oh yeah, I've seen that Sonic Pi. That's a. I haven't played with it, but I have seen it.
Yeah. We that's actually a really good question, Kevin. We have at Penn Manor School District here in Lancaster. We've really struggled with finding tools for music composition, for creation, that work well in a classroom. I think I saw, Joseph, you mentioned Audacity. Audacity is terrific for audio recording, but for straight up composition, it is really, really tough. This is one sore spot where I'm just not finding tools that work well with younger kids in particular. Where again, the needs are not necessarily for all of the tools that you would find in a DAW, right? Or an adult-based music composition kit. So yeah, I'd be curious if I think there's some looking at some chat here. Be curious,
Music blocks.
Kevin, do you know
Music
anything
blocks.
for young kids? Does anybody else?
Scratch, right?
Okay, and that's
This is Music Blocks.
Yep,
Music
absolutely.
Blocks is Scratch with a music. It's Walter Bender's doing it. One of Jeff's students is working on it. Let me.
Is this music blocks from Sugar Labs? Okay.
Yeah. So that for young kids, this is the thing to go to there.
Okay, well, that's a good tip. I was not familiar with this. I'm just doing some Googling here as you're describing it. So looks like that's it. Okay, great. That's something I can certainly check out at musicblocks.net. Okay, it looks like I saw the Sugar Labs project as well. Jeff's going to jump in as well.
Oh, for older, have you looked at Muse Score 3?
Yes, we are very familiar with Muse Score. Yes, we are very familiar with Muse. Really well for older kids. It works really well for older kids, especially those that already have some composition.
Jeff,
but again,
Jeff, mute.
My need right now is for younger students. Yeah, if you could mute, please, Jeff. My first need is, or my biggest need really is to find something for elementary, even, 7th grade. Muse Score tends to get a little too complicated for elementary kids. So yeah, I'm really interested in checking out this Music Blocks recommendation. Jeff or Jeff, did either of you have something to say about music tools?
All right, I'll jump
Okay,
off when
sounds
you
good.
said
All right,
Jeff
so
is
hold that
coming
for a
in. I thought
second.
you were calling me in. But no, that was that.
Well, Jeff,
So
I would.
I'll just leave. But so I have a student. We have this capstone program where seniors work on a project for a year. Walter Bender is mentoring him. That's the one Kevin was referring to, and he's working on music blocks this year. So Kevin and I haven't been following it real closely, but we met with him once, and we plan on just finding out what he's doing. But he meets with Walter all the time, and he's actually going to contribute to music blocks. So it's pretty cool. So I'll leave now.
Okay, great, thank you. And yeah, Tom, I saw Reaper. That's kind of like the Pro Tools-esque digital tool. I am familiar with that. Again, not something, as you know, Tom Schwartz, who used to work at Penn Manor School District. That would be great for high school, probably not so much for our elementary kids, but that's definitely solid.
I did a really short demo for talking. One of the things when I'm talking about music with people, I like to. I'm working with slightly older students, but I like to talk to them with, when talking about the Raspberry Pi. And one of the things I like to start out with is the Pi and just an alarm clock buzzer. And then I ask a question like, hey, who can tell me what's important about the 12th root of 2? And it's like, I don't even know what that is. Well, I'm glad you asked. And so the music blocks thing that I pasted in is just a real quick demo of, going up a chromatic scale just by multiplying by the 12th root of 2. And so it's real short, but anyway, I will leave that at that.
All right, excellent. We do need to wrap up.